Everyone, Yan Zhao here. The week of too many streams finally comes to an end. Capping it off, Tim Lim, Mark Pellegrini, authors, creators, some of Iconic's most famous comics that there are. This year, they've crossed over yet again. Black Hops, Kamen America, and Soulfinder. How's it going, guys?
Doing swell. Thank you very much
Doing
for having
great.
us on. I think this is a first for both of us.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I've been trying to get you guys on for years, but it's you guys book quickly.
We as you can tell from our repertoires, we tend to stay pretty busy. So there are times when they can be really tough to get us into people's schedules.
All right. So, I did have a question of how exactly did you guys get into comics? Because Tim, I know you have a job in the medical field, and I've heard rumors that you have a couple other side hustles. So how did you decide like, yeah, I think this comic thing is going to be a pretty serious endeavor?
So I never wanted to make comics at all. I think Mark and I, we had known each other for a decade, and we kind of played touch and go with the idea, but it was just not something I was comfortable with. The way I got into it was I was doing merchandising art, and that was a great way of paying off like student debt and obviously my tuition and stuff like that. And we happened to be friends with people in South Texas who owned a comic book store, a rather large one. And he had entertained this idea of people like your art. Have you ever decided or thought about working in comics? And I said, no, not really. At the most, I'd probably want to do comic covers. And so he said, well, we can arrange that. We like doing variant covers for our store and whatnot. So I got started kind of dipping my toe into it by doing that. I did a couple of variant covers for IDW while doing the merchandising art. And basically, what happened was in 2016, we happened to have some friends, some mutual friends who worked for Antarctic Press, which is also down there in Texas. And they said, if you work on a comic, we like your art so much that we're pretty much just going to greenlight it. Now, at that time, Mark and I had just finished doing a sequential piece of work. It was a political piece of work called Thump the First Bunch of Days, which was a satire of the 2016 election. No one wanted to touch the subject because honestly, they were scared. And because Mark and I had day jobs, it was like, well, we're not going to get blacklisted because that would be discriminatory. And our coworkers typically are pretty friendly with us despite any type of political differences that we might have. And so after having done that, I thought to myself, well, that wasn't too bad. I actually did sequential work, and it wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be. So we basically took Antarctic Press up on the offer. We went back into political parody and satire. We made our first comic, which was My Hero Macadamia. It was and still is fairly popular. I think it went through 9 printings through Antarctic Press, and it continues to still sell on Iconic Comics. And after that, I think we just kind of got a taste for it. And I just asked Mark. I said, "Well, if we don't want to stop here, we can just keep on going." And the rest is history. We just never looked back after that.
Hmm. But like compared to the other things, a lot of people would just say, "Well, I got to double down on the day job and whatnot." Like, what was it that was like, this is actually like, there's got to be something that was like puts comics not necessarily over the day job, but like, you got a family, you got this, you got that. Like, what sort of like, yeah, this is the way to go.
I think two things. One is that my hobby, when I'm not working, when I'm not doing my vocation, is drawing anyway. So I just thought to myself, well, now if there's a way to actually get paid for it, I might as well just do it because I'm doing it anyway. The second truth of the matter is it's just fun. During this weekend, we did Saline County Comic Expo, which is a local convention. And Mark and I were laughing about it because we encountered two people and they had the same story that I did. We met two pharmacists in the area and they turned half their pharmacy into basically a Japanese store where you can buy Japanese goods like
Uh-huh.
sundry items and dry
Like Pocky
foods.
and Ramune, stuff like that.
Oh,
Yeah, and
nice.
I asked them that question. I said, "What made you think to turn half your pharmacy into this?" And they said the same thing. They said, it's just fun, and we're getting paid to do it because we operate a pharmacy as well. And then we had another gentleman. He tagged me on Instagram. The name isn't coming to me right now, but I think his name is Kevin. And Kevin came up, and it's the same thing. He works, I think, in the OR at our local hospital. And he said, "Hey, I work in the medical field too, and I want to get into comics." And I thought, this is just a funny thing that kind of happens. I don't know how many people know this story, but there's two other Asians that we know who are a lot more popular than we are. Tom Wen and Jim Lee. They both have the same
Yeah.
story of their parents that essentially wanted to
Oh
go into the
yeah.
medical field, and they did. Like they actually went and took MCAT classes and stuff. And I think in both cases, I don't think they actually committed to it, but they got far enough where that was something that they could do. And then they basically turned around and said, "Well, I actually found out that doing the comic stuff can be pretty lucrative." So it's kind of a similar story, but the reality is it's just fun. I mean, if you're able to actually turn your hobby into something that you can make a little bit of scratch on, then I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I still keep my licensure. I mean, I still have it as my primary vocation, and Mark still works where he works. So we're just chugging along, and we're just having fun along the way.
Can you, both of you, can you ever see this being, the full-time gig at some point? Do you think maybe this will replace whatever the main job is now?
I'll let Mark answer this portion.
Well, for that, I mean, that's a good question. I still have my day job, 40 hours a week. That means that there's a chunk of 9 hours every day where I have to work on my day job and I can't work on my writing. Um, but also, all my benefits are, with my day job. So it's going to have to get to a point where it's not just about making more doing comics than at my day job, but making more doing comics and being able to afford health insurance, dental plans, stuff like that. Uh,
Hmm.
if we ever get there, who knows? It'd be cool if we did. If we don't, and things just stay the way they are, things are pretty good right now. So I can't really complain. What helps for Tim and I, though, the fact that we both have day jobs and we do 3 books a year, and our books are between 56 and 64 pages each. The way we're able to do that is because we have a streamlined process of how we create our books from brain to printed page. We kind of have this rhythm worked out between us. So as long as we follow that process, we've got it kind of down to a science where we can juggle both of them, and it's not so much of a hassle anymore. I mean, and also, yeah, the extra income, the supplementary income is nice. When we first started, we weren't making any money. We were breaking even on our first couple of crowdfund books. I think that was Black Hops 2 and Wall Might 2 were both our first crowdfunded books, and they made enough to pay for printing and fulfillment and everything, and a little bit left over for us to roll into the next book. And then we did Kamen America, and that did even better. And then we took the profits from that, rolled them into the next book, which was Kamen America 2, and that did much better. And then it just kind of did better and better each time. And now we're finally able to take a little bit of money and put it into our savings accounts.
That's awesome. So, speaking about that schedule, um, looking at the indie world, putting out 3 books a year is almost crazy, especially when you have full-time jobs. So I was always wondering, like, how do both of you manage just to crank out that volume of work? Is it, Mountain Dew, No Dose, Joke Cola, Deal with Satan? How do you manage it?
Part of it is over time, I learned how to work fast, and I have my own methodology for doing it. Basically, my rule of thumb is I need to be able to finish a full page between 4 to 8 hours. And I have learned to time myself to not exceed the 8 hour mark. I don't get much sleep, to be honest, but then again, I think part of it is that as I get older, I just need less sleep. I typically will stay up to about 2 or 3 in the morning, and then I will be up by sometime between 7 and 9. And that way I can get ready for the workday and do everything I need to. I've gotten to the point where I get pretty excited in terms of waking up. Like as soon as I get up to do something, it's over. There's hardly any chance of me going back to sleep. It also helps that we don't have any children, and I think that's a big factor. There's a lot of people who do have kids, and it is an understandable thing where they have to prioritize their family and they don't have the time or the energy to work on it. So part of it is the time management. the other part of it is the fact that we took quite a bit of time off to preemptively work on our books so that we would have an advantage as far as time is concerned. This part is actually not that new. It's typical for the Western comic book industry. The books that you're seeing on the shelf right now are typically
Mhm.
books that were already finished about 4 to 6 months ago. So it's actually not a novel concept. We just applied it to crowdfunding. So right now we have Black Ops X Common America for crowdfunding, but that book was finished back in late January. So we're about 5 to 6 months ahead of schedule, and we're starting work on Common America 7. I should get the final script by Monday, and so again, we're already working on the work that's going to be ready by January. And so that preemptive work buys us the time that we need for anything that might come down the road.
Hmm. Um, all right. So you had mentioned friends with a Japanese store, and there seems to be a lot of connection to Japan, especially in the direction you're going. So first of all, have either of you been to Japan?
I
Marquez.
have. Yeah, I went back in 2005, so that was a long time ago. It was when I was taking Japanese in college. I used to be pretty
Ah,
conversationally skilled at Japanese. I was never fluent, but I could communicate. But I've lost a lot of it from lack of practice over the years, so I'm not as good as I used to be. But we've surprised that we have actually quite a few readers in Japan, even though currently our book is only available in English. Our number one customers on Amazon Kindle, are from Japan. The Japanese buy more copies on Amazon Kindle than even in the U.S. And so we recently launched a Kamen America Japan account on Twitter, and that one has been getting a lot of engagements with Japanese people on social media who are just really interested in Kamen America. Even though they can't read it, we've had a lot of them tell us that they've been using Common America to help them study their English, and they also use this thing called Google Lens, which is kind of like an app on your
oh
phone
yeah,
where you can
yeah.
use the camera to automatically translate text. And our Common America web series on Webtoons that updates every Wednesday, a friend of ours has translated some of them into Japanese and posted them on social media, and they've gotten a lot of likes. So we're gonna try and move ahead with having official Japanese translations of our Common America books, and we're working on that right now. Hoping to have the first omnibus, which collects Common America 1 through 4, available in Japanese for Japanese readers to enjoy. And I don't know, they seem really interested and they seem really excited about it. I think ever since I started the Common America Japan account, within just a couple days, I already got 200 new followers who are all Japanese.
I think the most humbling thing that's happened within the last week was, so for people who are not familiar with it, you have these things called dojinshi, and
Hmm.
what a dojinshi typically is it typically is a fan-made work of an existing property. It's essentially really good fan-produced material, and people will use that at comic conventions in Japan to try and get the attention of editors and people who are in the manga market to try and either get jobs or just to get noticed for future work. And we were surprised because one of the Japanese readers, he actually basically formed a coalition of Common America readers in Japan to make their own
Wow.
Common America doujinshi, and they're actually going to debut it at Comiket here in just a few weeks. And it's interesting dealing with the Japanese culture.
Hmm.
We were actually talking about it over the weekend as part of one of our business meetings, and I said that Japanese Twitter is very different than American Twitter. It's very reflective of their culture as a whole. It's very polite. There's a lot of niceties attached to it, and one of them I contacted and I said, if you need any help, we can offer assistance. If you need artwork or a cover or anything like that, we're just very honored and we're very humbled that this news has come about. And his reply back to me was essentially, um, in the doujinshi culture, it is very honorable when the creator acknowledges the work. So that's all we need from you. It is also dishonorable to have you pay for it for us to send you the work. So he said, in time for the comic convention, we will send you the finished work on us for you to look at and to keep for yourself. So we're very thankful. Again, we're kind of at a loss of words in terms of how to address this from a cultural standpoint, but those people pretty much have our undivided attention because they have been very receptive of what we've done, and we're going to try our best to try and cater to them, which is why I think we're actually revealing on the show for the first time. We are in the process of translating the whole Common America library into Japanese for that market specifically, because
Wow.
I think they want it, and we have also hired a person to help us with our webtoons. I think starting in September, there is going to be something that we're going to be doing a bit differently, but moving forward, the webtoon will also be done in both English and Japanese. And we're very excited about both projects. It also helps that Mark can speak it to some extent so that
Hmm.
he can know at least, as far as the translation is concerned, roughly if it's
You're on the
accurate
right
or not.
track.
Yes. And so that's good. And so I think everything is kind of working very nicely.
Okay, so I've talked to a couple of other creators about having books go into other markets, specifically Japan, because it seems to me like as long as you're not doing capes and cowls, a lot of the books, especially the indie books in the U.S., would actually do kind of well over there. Um, so it just how much does getting it translated add to the cost of making a book? Is it like, would you say it's prohibitive for the average person, or it's not that much on the back end of the work?
I would just say that relative to our budget, it does not cost that much. However, if I was starting out for the first time, I would say yes, it actually does take a significant portion of one's um, budget to accomplish it. However, I think that if you have any significant following or readership, it's something definitely to look into, but you just have to know your market. I think there are
Mhm.
some countries in the world, for example, where the readership is big enough that I think you should translate it into that key language. For example, probably after Japan, a country we might want to look at is France. France is the second largest consumer of manga in the world outside of Japan, which is shocking. You would think it would be America because of how prevalent it is in our culture. But France has had a head start on that because they have such a robust readership market to begin with. I mean, they still have newsstands and tabacs where they sell newsstand items and sundries and goods and things of that nature. And one of their comic conventions is actually one of the largest in the world, one that even I think Japanese people go to attend. So I think one just has to know their market pretty well. I think if anyone is listening and thinks, well, all I have to do is just take my book and just translate into Japanese and tada, I'm going to hit pay dirt. I don't think it quite works that way.
No.
I think that it has to be something that does appeal to them. You do have works that I think are distinctly American that they might like, but that's not a be all and end all. It's kind of
Right.
like, it's like Europeans. A lot of Europeans like, I mean, it is stereotypical, but Europeans typically like uh, Walt Disney comics and they like westerns.
Yep.
So again, kind of ironic because even here in America, Walt Disney is synonymous with kind of a media empire, but you don't really think of comics when you think of like Mickey Mouse or Scrooge McDuck or Donald Duck or anything of that nature. In the same sense, the Western genre is largely dead in Western comics outside of maybe Jonah Hex. You don't hear about it too much. So I think every creator when they're looking at doing a foreign translation has to find out first where they think that market might be that's not necessarily in the United States.
We had a funny interaction with one of our Japanese readers. We're just picking her brain, asking her about, uh, what we should do. Do you think this would sell the Japanese like this, et cetera, et cetera? And we're asking her about the cover that we should do for the Kamen America Omnibus Japanese edition. And we asked if we should go with the current cover that we have, which is really good, excellent art by Jeff Spokes, but it's done in a Western style, or if
Hmm.
we should use a different cover done by a Japanese artist that more matches Tim's style, that manga aesthetic. And she answered us in English. She said, Japanese people like anime art. So we got the message.
Yeah, but even within that, there's a lot of different styles of
Hmm.
manga, anime art.
Oh yeah, it's like Berserk doesn't look like Sailor Moon. They
Yeah,
have
exactly.
a whole like array of styles, and same thing with Western comics. I think there is definitely interest in Japan, and that's the same way we look at manga as being exotic. They look at American comics as being exotic. Like while we're watching slice of life anime like K-On!, they're watching slice of life cartoons like King of the Hill and enjoying them for the same reasons because it's a window into a culture on the other side of the planet. So they do. So anybody out there who doesn't think that their book might be popular in Japan because it's not done in a manga or anime aesthetic, that's not true. Um, you just uh, have to market it and get them to notice it and pay attention to it.
Yeah, I've always thought that there was room, especially at the manga kisa. So in Japan, kisa-ten means coffee shop, but a manga kisa is it's like a coffee shop that has like a manga library inside. The walls are just decked out, and you go in there and you buy a drink or some food, and you sit there uh, and you just read it while you're there. In the big cities, at any rate, it's extremely popular, especially for women. When you miss the last train, you don't want to be out in the streets at night, so you just hang out there until the first train the next morning. And to me, those places always seemed ripe to have like a foreign section, of stuff that was
Mm.
translated into Japanese but comes from other countries.
There are some Japanese. So in Japan, especially in like Akihabara, there are some specialty comic book stores that sell Western comics,
Hmm.
untranslated. So, but they can only order through like previews catalogs. So we release reprints of Kamen America and Black Ops through Antarctic Press, and those are sold through previews, and they're sold direct markets and American comic shops. But Japanese specialty stores like Blister Comics, they can order through previews as well. So Kamen America 2 was released through previews this year, and Blister Comics and a few other specialty shops in Japan have been frequently selling out of them. They keep ordering copies and they keep selling out, and they're being bought, I'm pretty sure, sight unseen by just Japanese customers who are interested in Western comics who see that cover by Tim and Genzoman and it says Kamen America 2 on it, and they may not necessarily be able to read it perfectly, but they find it visually striking enough to be interested in it. And we get notified on Twitter by a bunch of Japanese readers telling us that it's sold out again, at Blister Comics and these other specialty shops. So there is definitely an interest in Japan for Western comics, and enough of one that they're willing to keep buying our book until it sells out.
Wow, that's pretty awesome. So, as you see kind of maybe inroads into the foreign market, what do you guys really see as what went wrong in the US comics market? Like clearly we can go back in the last, 5 years, 7 years and just watch it really nosedive off a cliff. But even before that, to me, like things were on the downslope. In Japan, they still have a great culture. They sell millions of basically comics every week or every month, I should say. What happened in the US?
I think it's a
The comic.
multi. I think it's a
Cool.
multifactorial thing, and so obviously, please no one take our answers as gospel. We're not authorities on this at all. I'm gonna try and give some of the answers that I think are less heard of. I think that one of it is probably something that we don't even have control over, which is inflation over the years, or as they call it, controlled inflation. Used to, it was considered a disposable hobby. You bought comics off newsstands
Mm.
because you were a kid and you could afford it, and there was typically a plethora of books to choose from. Even when I was growing up in the 80s, you either bought it through the newsstand at Walmart or a grocery store, or you could buy it at the periodical section in that same grocery store or that same Walmart, and you typically had like Archie Digest right next to it, and you typically had a choice. And I remember that was the one thing my parents did not care about as far as what I bought. They were just very happy that I was reading. And typically these books at the most expensive were maybe a buck 50 at the most. The other thing too was I didn't buy it to collect. I bought it because I wanted to read it, and it was something that as a kid, 22 pages or 24 pages took quite a while to read. I mean, that ate up about 30 minutes or an hour of my time to get through one of those books. And so it was a great hobby to have, and it was fairly harmless. I think that a combination of a lot of factors kind of contributed to its current downfall and decline. The collector's market, for one, combined with the rising price of the book itself, has made it so that people who want to just keep up with it as just a hobby, where it's like, hey, I have disposable income and it's not something that I need to spend a lot of money on. Suddenly, it's like, wow, this is expensive. I can't just buy this like every week, or at some point, it's like even once a month. It's just too expensive, and I have no desire to collect. I just want to read the stories. I'll just read I'll just wait for the trade paperback and wait to see if it's good or not before I actually commit to the purchase. And I think that's a big one. I know, like Chuck Dixon, he has a very good show called Ask Chuck Dixon, where he just answers fan mail. One of the things that he says led to the decline was the editorial positions listening more to the fans, as opposed to letting kind of like the editors and the writers trust their own instincts and their abilities to tell stories. So it became more or less dictated by what popular opinion said, or what a vocal minority was saying, rather than what the story was leading to. So I think these are some of the things that I'm noticing, and I'm just using this in contrast to, let's say, manga, because what I'm noticing is, for example, I have pretty much converted 99% of my reading to manga for those same reasons in reverse. Manga is cheaper by the page. It is released volumically, so I don't have to commit to it once a month. I commit to it maybe 3 times a year, and that's all I have to do. Or I pay $2 a month for Shonen Jump, and I can read 1,000 chapters of manga in 1 month. Compared to, let's say, a Marvel or DC app, where I'm having to pay a two-figure number for that subscription. So these, I think, are probably. I mean, I know that they've been said before on other streams and by other people, but I think these are the ones I hone in on personally when I think about it, and just ignoring the whole like political angle of bad storytelling, bad writing, bad art,
Yeah.
that type of thing.
Well, I mean, with comics in America anyway, it actually, I think the reason there's a genre decline, or just a lack of alternatives, and not to say there aren't alternatives to genres outside superheroes right now, it's just that they don't get as much mainstream play as Marvel and
Right.
DC, and it's a long-standing factor. It goes all the way back to the Comics Code Authority, because superheroes are actually a pretty short-lived genre between like the late 30s and to the mid 40s, but when World War II was over, superhero comics pretty much ended. And then the comics industry in the US was made up of genre comics after that. Romance comics, horror comics, crime comics, westerns. Those were all really popular. And even the superhero books that did survive, like Batman and Superman, they basically changed genres. Batman stopped fighting, supervillains, and he started like going into outer space and fighting monsters from other dimensions. It became like a sci-fi book. And Superman became practically a comedy book for a long time, where like Lois Lane was trying to trick him into marrying her, or Jimmy Olsen was trying to trick him into another get-rich-quick scheme. Oh, how is Superman going to teach him a lesson? That kind of thing. And it was a whole bunch of different genres until the Comics Code Authority came around, and the legislation was so strict that you couldn't have romance comics anymore because they were too bawdy. You couldn't have horror comics anymore because they were too violent. You couldn't have crime comics anymore because they thought that they taught kids that crime paid, even though most of them were morality plays. You couldn't have westerns anymore because people were getting shot all the time, and that was too violent. Pretty much the only genre that could survive in that environment was superhero comics, about fantasy characters and costumes going around punching colorful supervillains and saving the day. And so that's what proliferated for the longest time and became synonymous in the US of, comic books mean superheroes. And that's just how we've been, for generations, we've been exposed to that idea. Same thing like animation. In Japan, animation, it comes in all flavors and all ages. There's adult animation, teenage animation, kid animation. There's fantasy, there's sci-fi, there's comedy, there's horror, there's everything. But in the U.S., mostly because of Disney marketing, animation means kid stuff. So
Yeah.
we just have a very different culture about comics and cartoons in the U.S. And a lot of it's just because for 3 generations they were only one thing. And getting out of that rut is something that's going to take a cultural shift in the U.S. And I think in a way we're getting there because so much Japanese media is now entering the mainstream in the US. From the kids who are watching anime in the 90s are now the parents who are raising their kids and telling them it's okay for them to watch anime, and those kids are watching anime and reading manga. And so it'll probably take another generation or two, but we might finally get out of that ghetto of comics and cartoons being only for kids.
Hopefully, yeah. It's interesting to hear you say that because I've been saying similar things for years, um, and to me, all those people who got knocked out of those genres, like my mom would tell me, she used to read romance comics, and I had uncles who read war comics and westerns and stuff. I think all the people who would naturally fill into those genres are still there, but there's nothing for them,
Yeah.
which is why one reason why manga is going gangbusters. And definitely the economics, I kind of forgot how, as a kid, like I could get a comic book and a candy bar for $1. It was a
Yeah, same
long
here.
time ago, but yeah,
Yeah.
now $6 is kind of an investment.
Yeah, my dad would take me to Springfield Mall on the weekends, and we do some of our shopping. And there's this place there called News and Necessities. It was just a little newsstand joint in Springfield Mall, and they had a spinner rack just by the register, and that's where every week I would get an X-Men book or a Spider-Man book or something. And they only cost like $1.25 back then, so it was
Hmm.
like as much as a candy bar. They were just disposable entertainment. I mean, I kept my comics, but they were treated almost like newspapers. You would pick it up, you'd read it. It didn't cost you hardly anything, so you didn't think much about it. Now, yeah, with comics, I think the average price for a comic is between $4 and $5, and you have to go to a specialty boutique just to find one. It's not as accessible anymore.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so getting into um, this summer's big crossover. Let's see here. Uh, so Tim, you did the artwork for the original Soulfinder.
Yes, volume one.
So, like, at what point did you want that second bite at the apple?
Well, the second bite at the apple, I honestly, I reached the point where Mark and I had two IPs that we were working on, and I had to hand the reins off to someone else. And so that person was obviously Matthew Weldon. But because we worked very closely together, we had always talked about it's kind of a pie in the sky idea. We're not going to do it right now. I think the worst thing you can do for an execution is to think of crossover right away. Like, that's something we need to do. Go, go, go. And it's like, no, you have to build up to it. Even with, let's say, Marvel Comics, it took a while for the Avengers to actually coalesce, and then it took even more time for, let's say, Secret Wars. And when that happened, it was a big, big deal. But Mark and I had already preemptively said we have to put the enough things in the world where the potential for outside influences to come in would always be there. And so we did that gradually. Through Kamen America and through Black Ops, we introduced this idea of our MacGuffins pretty universally being religious in nature. And I think the first person to pick up on this was actually Matthew Reese. He had contacted us. We were doing a stream with him, and after the show, he said, I think I know where you guys are going. I think you guys are trying to cross over with Soulfinder. And I said, oh, what makes you say that? And he said, I noticed a small detail that people might have missed, and it's in your second volume. And it's that the relic that they're after is the hand of Saint Columba. And I know about that because that's Columba of Iona, who according to the legend, tamed the Loch Ness monster. I think this is where you're
Oh,
going with it. And I said, you're going to keep that a secret for a year because that is exactly what it is. And God bless him if he's listening. He kept it a secret for a year. But I told Mark, I said, we have set it. We have set the foundation. All we have to do is make it to that point where we can actually introduce that as a plot element. And sure enough, by the time we made it to Kamen America 4, we decided, I think the time is right. Let's go ahead and introduce it and get ready for it. So we introduced Redder at the end of Kamen America 4. We obviously talked to Doug Ernst about it, and he was all for it. Um, but this is something that you had to build up to. If you had asked us 2 years ago, even Doug would agree with this. If we said, Doug, we want to do a team up with Kamen America and Soulfinder, he would say, hell no. There's no way. It doesn't even make any sense. My world is too grounded in serious kind of supernatural theological framework, your world is too grounded in kind of comedic action. I just don't see how the two would even work. But Black Ops was the linchpin because, ironically, even though Black Ops has the more kind of farcical facade to it, it's the more serious of our two books.
Hmm.
Thematically, it's the one where it's pretty serious all throughout the books, even though the window dressing looks like it's cute and cuddly. And so we had to work at that to make it to the point where we said, I think we're at the point where readers will buy it. They're not going to scoff at the idea and say, this can't work because it's too different. We actually got very good reactions to it when we released our first trailer. People were saying, it wasn't, I don't think this will work. It was, I am very interested in how this will work. And that's the response that we wanted, because we said, well, we're going to show you exactly how we pull it off. And so it's led us to this moment.
Yeah, I definitely had questions about that. So, Mark, how did you go about balancing them? Because to me, Soulfinder has always been like a horror, and Common America, even though there are some serious moments, it's definitely more like light and fun. So, how did you,
Uh,
clearly through Black Ops, but how did you find that balance?
so I was actually really excited to write this one, and because I am a big horror guy, so I do that stream every Tuesday with Nasser and Full Custom Hot Dog Kino Namakan, where we just talk about horror movies. I got nothing but horror movies, horror comics, horror novels. So getting the opportunity to do a genre story based in horror was something that I wanted to do, but it wasn't necessarily on its own a good fit for Common America or Black Ops. So bringing in Soulfinder meant that I could do a bit more with mood and atmosphere and scary monsters and things. So I just kind of just like I really got to chew on it. It was great. Um, there's also, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I got to attach a story that I had been wanting to write for Black Ops since Tim and I were conceiving of it. We were thinking of at one point doing like an anthology of just shorter Black Ops stories, and I had this one that I wanted to do because it was going to be a horror themed story in that anthology, but we just never really found a way to juggle something like that with our ongoing narrative in Black Ops. But I was able to work that into the script with Soulfinder in a really intuitive way, and the pacing of the Soulfinder crossover came just really naturally because, as Tim said, we were able to take the time to set all that groundwork so all the pieces could fall into place. And so the story, in a way, almost wrote itself. And Tim, I mean, we both read obviously our own comic a million times to try and search for any sort of typos or any problems with it. But it reads very fluidly and organically, and to us, and hopefully it'll read that way to our readers when they pick it up after it goes in fulfillment when pre-orders close. But that's basically it. It wasn't as intimidating as I thought. The intimidating part was getting Father Redder's voice right, because Father Redder is Doug Ernst's character. And I've read Soulfinder 1 and 2, and I'd also read the script for Soulfinder 3 because Doug sent that to me just to give him any notes on it. And so I had to go back and reread all those over and over again to try and get the voice down. And I was really nervous when we sent the script to Doug for approval. And he didn't have hardly any notes. He said that I really like what you've done with Redder. He did a really great job with my character, and that was really flattering because when the creator of a character tells you that you did well with their character, that's kind of like a load off my anxiety. So I think Soulfinder fans will be very pleased with it, and so will Black Ops and Common America fans.
Awesome. So now that you guys have got so much going on, and you said 3 books a year is kind of your ideal space. Do you guys still feel that you have lots of material that you have in mind for these, or do you feel like, every year we want to add in a new series, or?
I don't think we're going to expand outside of these two. I think there might be potential in the future for a spin-off, but we would have to either nix or put one of the other books on the back burner for us to accomplish that. But we have a lot of stories left to tell. One of the things that I think shocks a lot of people is Common America is bookended. We know exactly how it ends. We know
Oh,
the final pages of whatever final volume that's going to be. The question is how long will we take to make it to that point. In theory, we could probably end it within 3 to 4 volumes without a problem. But for the time being, it's like we could easily go to at least 6 omnibuses before we get to that point. It all just depends on the physical nature of creating the book. It depends on our longevity. I mean, in case one of us might kick the bucket prematurely, and it also depends on the readership. I think as long as we have maybe 10 readers to just make sure we can actually just justify the hobby and make, like, I don't know, $200 each to create the stories, we'll keep on doing it up until that point where we say it's time to end this because we have organically reached the point where this is a good place to stop. But we don't foresee ourselves quitting anytime soon. It's something that I feel is a labor of love. We put everything that we've learned over a decade of doing this into it. We put a lot of personal experience into both the heroes and the villains that Mark writes. And so these characters live in our minds as fresh and as real as we hope they do in the minds of our readers. And so we want to make sure to do them justice by giving them their due diligence. And so we feel like doing another series or taking on a fourth book will be detracting from that. We're perfectly happy telling the tales that we want. For Mark, for example, like Black Ops, like he was saying before, it's essentially a military book, but I mean, heck, it kind of just turned into almost a horror book because it's centered around cryptids, and we like cryptids. That's one thing that Mark and I have as a mutual hobby, is we like discussing the paranormal and the supernatural and kind of strange mysteries in the world. And there's so many out there that people are not aware of. We actually put that in the book. It wasn't until recently that someone even mentioned to us. They said, "Hey, is Apex Moth a reference to the Mothman?" And I said, "It is. How come no one has mentioned that before?" I mean, it is. But again, I think that the whole cryptid thing, even though you have shows on television that cover it, I think by and large for a lot of people, they're not aware of it. But that's fine. We can use it as a vehicle to introduce things that we personally think are fascinating or interesting. So I don't think that the idea train has stopped. There are times when I think I think to myself, we run into a brick wall as far as where to go or take the story, but we always find a way around it fairly easily.
So then, could we possibly see a Soulfinder, Black Ops, Long Harbor crossover in the future?
We could. It would all depend on Alejandro Mirabal doing Long Harbor too. We like to typically have it where we have to know enough about the world and it has to be fleshed out enough that we can play with it comfortably, where we're not stepping on too many toes as far as canon is concerned. And I think with Long Harbor, he has a very robust history about the seaside port and what is the meaning behind all those crosses that are scattered about, and what's going to happen to his characters when they return to Long Harbor. So I think that would require him to expound on that first before we even broach that as a potential thing that could cross over. But there's nothing that is outside the realm of possibility. Um, we typically do a lot of research into any intellectual property that we want to cross over with, and it has to work within our world. One thing that we have said on numerous occasions is that we do not believe in alternate realities, so that does not exist. There is no reality where, like, Carly went with the military and she's Captain Kamen America. That does not exist. We want it so that everything is canon, and that means that anytime we cross over with something, we have to justify it within their framework too, as being something that's canonical to us. So for people listening out there who potentially want to cross over in the future, that's something that we have to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, right now, Black Ops characters are actually appearing in Brian Ball's comic Rags. So Rags number 8 just
Oh,
dropped, and for people who haven't heard, there's a special cameo, and it's going to be a multi-issue crossover with USAGI, Penelope, and other characters. But Brian sent us the script before he even put it through a second draft. He sent the script to us to read over. And our attitude is we want to make sure that his characters are written his way in his world. We focus on our characters. So we looked at the dialogue and the actions of Penelope and USAGI, and that's what we sent him notes on, just to make sure that our characters are written consistently and authentically. But Rags number 8, it's a funny comic. Rags in general is a funny book. It's a military action book. So that was a good fit for Black Ops and the Black Ops world. So they kind of meshed organically. So anybody who is waiting on the Soulfinder crossover and you want more Black Ops stuff, go check out Rags number 8.
Very cool. All right, so I definitely had a question about this crossover. So the last time I had Doug on the channel, you guys had sent out the Christmas package with Father Redder and some of the girls from Kamen America and Black Ops on it. And I had asked him, would Father Redder ever be tempted? And the answer was no. He is too strong in his faith. However, our man Chua, he's not a member of the clergy. He's a single guy. He's got a stable job. Of all the Kamen and the Black Hawk character and in Black Ops, who do you think he would be the best match for?
Doug is not going to like to hear this, but I don't think any of them. I don't think he's any of their types. We'll put it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, partly due to age. Most of them, I think the oldest one canonically is Misha, and I don't think that they're compatible. So unfortunately not. Now, if I had to say which one probably would be, it probably would be Common Victory. It would probably be Sylvia, because I think they would have their faith in common. I think personality-wise, they would be too different, though. So I think it would probably be a 2-date scenario, and they would just be friends because they find out that they don't really have that much chemistry going on.
So one of the rules with the Common Core girls is that they're wholesome, with the exception of Misha. Misha is the one who has had some experience because she's the oldest, but the characters themselves are all wholesome. Carly's wholesome, Kimiko's wholesome, Sylvia's wholesome. So we don't put them in situations that would be gross or anything.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and I was kind of wondering, how much of a conscious decision have you guys? Was the religion thing? I'm blanking on the character's name, but the priest that the Common Girls are friends with, Vladdy, that's it. Yeah. Sorry. He's in there. Most of the time you see any sort of religious figure in modern, whether it's comics or, movies, TV, they're portrayed as either very disinterested in the people they should be helping or, corrupt or something like that. Or it goes the other way where like everything is Jesus. Like, well, toast came out too dark. Jesus, please help me. It's like back in the day, they used to be good, just normal people.
Yeah. So, I mean, Tim puts in a lot of the authentic Catholicism into the book because Tim is Catholic. I'm not. So he knows the ins and outs of that. But we don't consider Kamen America to be a religious book. It's just that it has some characters, not every character, but some of them are Catholic. I mean, Kimiko is obviously not Catholic. Misha's not Catholic. She's maybe like Eastern Orthodox. But an important part of a character's personality and their backstory and their culture can be their religion. I remember in Ghostbusters, Winston is Christian. So that informs a lot of his conversations and his outlook in that series. Even in the real Ghostbusters, he would mention going to church, and he would make jokes like, between the four of us, we don't have the common sense God gave a doorknob. He'd make a joke like that. In Ghostbusters in the first movie, the insight he brings to Ray is to say, like, Ray, maybe the reason we've been so busy lately is because the dead have been rising from the grave. And then he quotes the Bible, and that gets Ray to look at it from a different perspective. But he's the only one in the movie who's religious, and it's not the end-all, be-all of his character. It's just part of who he is. There's an episode of X-Men Evolution that I really liked. It was a Christmas episode, and it just shows what all the different X-Men are doing on Christmas. And so you see, like, Nightcrawler, he goes to church because he's Catholic. You see Wolverine, he goes to a pool hall because he's a cynic. And then you see Kitty Pryde, who just stays home at the mansion because she's Jewish and doesn't celebrate Christmas. So it just kind of tells you that each of these characters, they have a different religion or lack of religion, and they do different things on Christmas, but that's just a part of who they are. Carly and Sylvia are Catholic, but that's just a part of who they are. So Carly goes to church, Sylvia goes to church, but that's just something that they do.
And Vicky is said to have gone to church, but obviously, if we wanted to make it a purely religious book, we would have all the Catholics be good guys. But that's obviously not
Right.
the case, because in the case of Vicky, spoiler alert, turns out she's not that good after all. I call it the effect of. I've said it on several streams before, but it reminds me of like Indiana Jones. And in Indiana Jones, on 2 occasions, he's gone after relics that are either Jewish in nature or Christian in nature. And in the first one, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, he goes after the Ark of the Covenant, which is a sacred item in both religions. However, no one would say that it's endorsing Judaism or Christianity. It just happens to be the world is made more lively in the context of this sacred artifact being taken seriously within that world. Same thing in The Last Crusade, which I consider to be the superior movie between the two. There are a couple of instances where there's key moments where you don't have to be a person of faith to think that those were impactful. And one of them is when Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford, he takes the Lord's name in vain, and Henry Jones, his father, played by Sean Connery, he slaps him across the face. And it's a serious moment in the movie. And you're like, why did he do that? And he says, that's for blasphemy. And it's to highlight the idea that in that world, in that story, the cup of Christ is not to be taken lightly. It's something that's serious, and it's something that his father, being a father figure, does to reprimand his son. So it reinforces 2 things. 1, the seriousness of the situation, and 2, his fatherly attitude to show who actually like wears the pants. Just because Indiana Jones is the star of the movie doesn't mean that he has authority over his father. He clearly respects him. And then at the end, there's the whole thing with like the healing with the cup of Christ and the Grail and everything like that. And you have to keep in mind that this was a movie that was directed by a Jewish director. So obviously his goal was not the promotion of Christianity. It was taking what he was given to tell the most compelling story there is. And what we set out to do with Kamen America was, on the front end, we didn't make her a Catholic necessarily on purpose because I wanted to push a Catholic agenda. It just so happens I said we have to create a character whose moral compass has something that informs it. It's not informed by a degree of moral relativism. I don't think that that's right, and I don't think that her character would think that that was right. As a fully fleshed out person, I think it comes from a backstory of having gone to Catholic school, having Catholic friends around her, having had a family that went to church together. That will play out later on, and I think it will serve to highlight her familial system and her network of friends, and it will also highlight some of her failings and some of the decisions she has to make later on. There's a key part in Volume 2, and people like it. I mean, these aren't even Catholics who like it. They said that, we've never heard that quote before. Virtue is its own reward. It's not said in the Gospels or by any apostle or disciple. It was by John Henry Newman, who was a Catholic. And yet it's a phrase that we hear a lot of times in pop culture, but that actually informs some of Carly's lessons that she has to learn in that volume and later on. So the Catholicism aspect, yes, part of it is because of my own upbringing, but part of it is because of the cinema and the media that I consumed when I was a child that had an impact on me as far as good storytelling is concerned.
Yeah, and I think too that it comes off as I don't know if authentic is quite the right word, or probably more impactful because it seems accurate to the characters. Like they all seem to act correctly or incorrectly based on their own internal feelings. So, like Carly, for example, sometimes she knows she's doing something that's wrong, which is, that we know she's Catholic, we can identify her value system. And it's not portrayed as, I don't know. Yeah, exactly like you said. Like most people at least in the US, they have these value systems, whether they go to church now or they went before. It's kind of built into them. And when you see a lot of mass media from the big corporations, it's just anybody religious is just kind of creepy, as opposed to just the guy who lives next door.
Well,
Or
that's
they're
funny because
informed by a
we've
degree of they're informed by a degree of stereotyping in terms of, well, the religious people are kind of like these backwater hillbillies who
Yeah.
speak in tongues and stuff. So a lot of it is based on stereotypes of how they depict Christianity as a whole. I don't even know if they're aware of the denominations or anything of that nature. But even going back to, let's say, a character who might be an atheist, even in that instance, an atheist character does not necessarily mean that they are any less moral, but it actually gives them the opportunity for a type of growth. I mean, something that Mark had mentioned was X-Men Evolution, but even going back further, you look at the original X-Men animated series. There's an impactful episode where it's the Nightcrawler episode, and it's a play between Nightcrawler and Wolverine is clearly not a believer because he's seen things like he has lived a life where he's witnessed horrors and stuff like that. But the impactfulness is not the Catholicism of Nightcrawler. The impactfulness of it is Wolverine at the end praying, and he doesn't even say that he believes in God. He's just like, I'm just gonna give this a chance, and it's him like pouring out his heart in private. So it reflects his character, showing that he's not kind of this hardened guy who's completely callous to the world. It shows that he has a vulnerability. And the episode was not to promote Christianity. The episode was to promote redemption. The idea that they use that vehicle to show that a character like Wolverine, who might come across as very gruff and very cold to the world, has some things that he needs to get off his chest. And so I think that knowing your characters and following them through to their logical conclusion, you have to take every opportunity you can for heroic growth. And sometimes that doesn't even mean necessarily embracing a religious faith. It means that you have to show the duality of good and evil in them. That's how you get the most out of your character.
So Harrowinberg had a question. If it's not too off topic, what do you think of Empowered?
I have actually never read it.
we like Chris Warren's art. We actually talked about him on a stream a few weeks ago,
Adam
and someone
Warren.
asked us a similar question. I haven't read Empowered either, but I'm familiar with is it Adam Warren? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, Adam
Adam
Warren.
Warren.
I'm familiar with his art just because he used to do so many covers for like Dark Horse. He did the covers for the Star Wars manga, and of course I've seen covers of Empowered, but I've never actually read it. Though I've heard that it's really good, and even though it has a lot of cheesecake in it, like part of her, my understanding is part of the main character's power is that every time she powers up, her clothes tear off, but that doesn't. It doesn't preclude it from having a very interesting story, mythology, and characterization. And something similar that I learned from anime, Tim convinced me to watch this one show called Kill la Kill, and I had written it off for the longest time as just being a cheesecake show because it's a lot like Empowered. It deals with skimpy clothing, and the skimpy clothing being an important plot device within the show. I thought it was just a cheesecake series, but then I watched it, and it has a really fascinating mythology. All of the stuff to do with fashion and clothing and the lack thereof clothing is all plot relevant. The characters are really deep. Their relationship to each other is really fascinating, and it's just a good show that happens to have cheesecake in it. And you kind of, if you watch Kill la Kill and you walk away with any revelation, it's that having attractive characters and having a fascinating and well thought out plot and good characterization, those aren't mutually exclusive concepts. And so we kind of bring that with Kamen America. Kamen America is an all ages title. We want to think that a kid who's like 12 can read it and there's nothing wrong with it, but our characters are attractive. They are pretty. I mean, Sailor Moon used to air on Toonami. Sailor Moon's a great TV series. Everyone loves and knows those characters by heart. Those characters are all beautiful. I mean, Tim and I were just talking about X-Men. I remember I used to read, Jim Lee's X-Men back in the day,
Hmm.
and Psylocke just goes running into battle in a bathing suit. She's just like jumping, kicking people in a one piece. And she's still a really interesting character with a really, really complicated backstory. But she just happens to wear a bathing suit into battle. That doesn't detract from the complexity of her character.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and here we go. Another Badger fan. Badger's hot.
I mean, yeah, he's furry, so yeah, I'm guessing he's hot all the time because it's like wearing a fur jacket
Well, I don't know.
24/7.
Isn't he from Brazil though? You think he'd be used to it?
They're from South America in general. I actually looked at their population um, overall in that country, and they're just spread all throughout South America. Because I was wondering, it's like, are they concentrated more in Colombia or Brazil or Argentina or wherever? No, they're everywhere. I mean, apparently they're not close to being endangered either. But yeah, South America is generally pretty hot.
That is true. And speaking of Badger, so are we ever going to see Badger join the Black Ops team?
I can't spoil that. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. That's something that we are going to leave to the imagination and speculation of readers to see if that's something we'll actually do.
All right. So is there anything else we should know about Black Ops X Kamen America X Soulfinder?
I would say the only thing that people need to know about is that just me personally, as far as Mark's writing is concerned, it is probably his most serious work. I think people will
Ooh.
be shocked at how thoughtful it is. There is an aspect of it that we thoroughly enjoyed between the three of us. Um, it was something that I had come up with as a plot device, and then Mark fully implemented, and then we kind of pulled on Doug as a surprise. So I think that when people get their hands on it and they read it, I think that they will not only thoroughly enjoy it, but they're going to see that it came from a place of um, deep. Um, how do I say it? It definitely comes from a place of deep thought in terms of what we wanted to convey. There was definitely a message that we wanted to have readers walk away from, and I think people will find it to be rewarding as far as that is concerned. This is not one Common America. Sometimes people do like the moral messages, but sometimes people just like the action and they like the funny sequences and things like that. This is something where you're going to get a lot of benefit from the true art of storytelling that I think we pulled off pretty seamlessly. It's one of our most streamlined works, despite the fact that it's a crossover, and we're just very proud of that.
All right. And so if people are interested, probably Kickstarter is the best place if they just want the book by itself. I think you're sold out of those on Indiegogo. All the digital copies are still on Indiegogo, and the the omnibus bundle is
Yep,
still there.
we have the Omnibus and Common America bundle still available on Indiegogo. I think we have 10 of those left. It says 8 out of 18.
Hmm.
But all the other physical copies on Indiegogo have sold out. Although if you want digital, all the digital ones, those are bottomless, so you can check those out. But Kickstarter currently still has the most stock available for our bundles. And Tim, what else are we going to do on Kickstarter?
So we're gonna make the announcement tomorrow, so people have 24 hours to prepare. But we will be putting out the saddle stitch editions of Soulfinder because those books sold out quick. Those are the hardest ones to keep in stock. Most people, I think, are coming to this campaign already familiar with our two works, but less familiar with Soulfinder, and they're trying to get caught up. And we've sold out twice already. Unfortunately, we don't have any more soft covers in stock to make up for the paired combinations that we need. So, we're proud to announce that we are actually going to be releasing the Saddle Stitch editions. We are putting those into print as we speak, and we will be offering those, I believe, on Wednesday morning. And I think the time right now is tentatively 10 o'clock. But if you pay attention to us on social media, or if you're following the campaign, you're going to get a notification of that sometime, I believe, early tomorrow morning to give more details. But for those of you who actually backed the campaign early, congratulations. For that same price, you get a softcover edition of both books in their first edition form. but for that same price, you can also get the add-ons for the Saddle Stitch versions. It'll actually be the first time Iconic Comics is officially on a Soulfinder Volume 1 book, so that'll be something. So
Nice.
luckily, yes, we are definitely going to be back in stock here in the next 48 hours and opening those up. So be on the lookout for that announcement.
All right. Well, guys, thanks a lot for joining me today. I know you're quite busy, and I don't want to keep you any longer than I need to. So, the current Kamen America, Black Ops Kamen America Soulfinder is out now. Keep an eye out for Kamen America 6 coming in 1 month, 2 months, was it?
Oh, it'll be. We always launch the campaign whenever the fulfillment begins. So right now, the good thing is that I talked to the printer this morning. We put this into print about 2 or 3 months ago, so we're just in the queue. I believe we're actually getting the books in within 4 weeks. So I think by the second week of July, all the books are coming in. So we are on track for an on-time fulfillment that should begin in late August. So right now we're estimating that we will launch Kamen America 6 either the first or second week of September, and our goal is to complete the fulfillment before Thanksgiving. So that will give us some time off to enjoy the holidays and also prepare for the launch of Kamen America 7, which will be in January of next year.
Wow. That's a pretty aggressive schedule.
Yeah, we work fast. Like we said before the stream, we're already working on 7. Mark will have the finished script to me probably by Monday. And that's not even including a secret project we're working on, which we can't reveal right now, but we will reveal in probably the coming weeks. So stay tuned for that little tidbit about to drop pretty soon.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming. Everyone, I will be off for a little bit, but on the 26th, I will have Rod Looper and Adam Bennett on to talk about their new book, Fractured. And on the 28th, I have Adam Lawson coming back, and he's going to talk about his book with Wesley Snipes.
Ooh.
Ooh.
So thanks, everyone, for coming, and we'll see you soon.
See ya.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Have a good night, everyone.